Hello, my name is Matty Stratton. I'm a staff developer advocate at Pulumi, and we're going to talk a little bit about how the journey has gone from DevOps, which you might be familiar with, into cloud engineering. So let's go on a little bit of a journey together. I'm really appreciative of your time today, and I hope you're having an excellent experience here at Serverless Days. So let's start by looking back a little bit. And if we kind of take a look at what got us, where did DevOps come from? So in 2009 was kind of an inflection point, which was quite some time ago. So John Allspaw and Paul Hammond, they gave a talk at Velocity Conference called 10 Deploys Per Day, DevOps Cooperation at Flickr. And witnessing that talk, a cat named Andrew Clay Schaefer, this is our best understanding of where the word DevOps came from, was this tweet that Andrew tweeted when he was watching this talk. So you can blame Andrew for the term DevOps. And at this conference as well, Andrew proposed an open space conversation, an unconference session to talk about this very idea, and one person showed up for that, and it wasn't even Andrew, but we'll talk about that in just a second. But a couple other things, this great book by Jez Humble and Dave Farley came out called Continuous Delivery, and at the same time, Gary Groover and some other folks at HP wrote a book on large-scale agile development. And so a lot of these principles that we think about DevOps, they kind of came from here. So I want to think about this, though. This is where DevOps came from, and the reason will become apparent in a minute, right? Okay, so as I said, Andrew created this want to have this conversation about agile system administration, actually. And one person came to that open space. It wasn't Andrew, but it was a Belgian named Patrick Dubois. And a little bit later, Andrew and Patrick got together, and they decided to put on a conference they called DevOps Days. And the reason that they called it DevOps Days is Agile System Administration was too long of a name for a conference. And I just want to point out that this is, when we look at what those talks were, this was back in 2009, the things that people were talking about are very similar to things we're talking about today, but they were not necessarily, some of them were about tooling, but a lot of them were about how people work together. And I think that's really key. And over the years, we've seen a vast proliferation of DevOps days around the world. And to me, this is what DevOps is about. It's about this community. It's about practitioners that are coming together. People are learning from each other. It's not about presentations. And when we see the large number, and we didn't really see that big uptick last year for reasons that are sadly apparent, thanks COVID, but everything that we know about DevOps comes from the people who do the work and how they're learning from each other. And most events like this depend very heavily, like a big feature of them are these open space conversations. And Andrew has said that if it was up to him, DevOps Days would be nothing but open spaces, but he knew that nobody would get their boss to send them to a conference if there at least weren't some people on stage. I want to talk about a couple different ways that people talk about DevOps that I really like. So Donovan at Microsoft, he talks about it's a union of people, process, and products, okay? But it's about delivery of value. But remember that union part. That's really key, right? And then Andrew, I pressed him to give me a definition. He didn't want to do it, but this is what he told me. But he's about optimizing the human experience, and it's the software that's the software and the humans, okay? So remember, this is what we think DevOps means. And this is what we know DevOps is not. We know it's not being a full stack 10x rockstar engineer. It's not just putting developers on call. It's not just about t-shirts and stickers. But what is it? So we also talk, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but there's this idea we call CALMS. And so this was created at the first DevOps Days in the US in 2010. What it stands for, the only reason that the words are in this order is it spells a word. You could also call it CLAMS if you want, but it's not that the order matters. But we talk about culture, and we talk about automation as a key principle of DevOps. And the thing is, in the continuous delivery book, Jez and David said that, asking experts to do boring and repetitive, but technically demanding tasks is an absolute guarantee of human error. more so than anything except sleep deprivation or inebriation. And I'll tell you, as a longtime system administrator, boring and repetitive yet technically demanding tasks is 100% what my job used to be. We like to talk about the ideas of lean and lean principles when we think about value stream mapping. I'm going through this because it's not a deep dive into what comms is, but there are these ideas. What we're looking for when we think about lean, we're thinking about reducing waste. You might say that's increasing efficiency, but it's not exactly the same. And we think about measurement. Measurement really matters because how else do we know that we're improving? And sharing is, I know I said that none of these things are more important than the other, but to me, sharing is maybe my favorite part of comms because it's how we get better. It's sharing within your organization, but it's also sharing within our community. And one example I like to give for this was in the early days of DevOps, all that we heard from were kind of the Silicon Valley or the unicorn companies. We were hearing from Etsy and Facebook and Netflix. And I live in Chicago, by the way, so I'm from the Midwest. And we sit there and we're like, but you know what? We do real work here. We knew that behind those enterprise firewalls, people were doing DevOps things, but they weren't talking about it. And then there was this great conference put on called DevOps Enterprise Summit. And then all these enterprises and public sector agencies came and started talking about what they were doing. And the reason that I bring this up is the sharing matters because it's what gives you the art of the possible, which if I know someone's done something, I know it's possible, and then I will be able to get there and do it. So this all sounds really great, right? Like, awesome. We're getting together, we're collaborating, we're sharing, we're doing all these great things. That's what DevOps is supposed to be. But that's not what happened over the last 10 years or so. We're hearing different things when we talk about DevOps. It's not, what are we talking about now? Or is it all about automation? A lot of times when the conversation about DevOps is about automation tools, and I know I work for a company that does automation, but I can assure you that that's not all that there is. Or that is it all about container orchestration? Kubernetes will save everyone, right? That's not what we've been trying to talk about, but yet it continues to come back to that. I've heard this one before, which is this theory here of culture is for yogurt, right? Which is this idea that the culture part doesn't matter. It's about the tooling. It's about all the technology. And this is the news I have here is DevOps is being sold to you right now, unfortunately. And, as this quote says, you can't buy DevOps, but I can definitely sell it to you. And that was said by Matty Stratton, the charismatic grifter. So as we talk, you probably heard a lot of, okay, so great, we have DevOps, but then there's DevSecOps, right? Like, well, security's got to be a part of this, but then biz DevOps, we have the business, and serverless DevOps, I guess, is a thing. Maybe we're learning about that today, and DevSec DB ops, and what about DevOps? And this is the thing, like, all of these were kind of what we meant about DevOps in the beginning, and it just sort of has that name because Andrew tweeted a hashtag. And here's the thing, it's like words are hard. They might mean different things to different people, and we read into them. So yeah, remember, words are hard, but don't worry. I have more words for you. I'm going to complicate this with new words, but I think it helps a little bit. And that word or words, I guess, that we're talking about is we talk now a lot about this idea of cloud engineering. So when we look at the definition of cloud engineering, that's employing standard software engineering practices across our infrastructure, across our app dev, and across our compliance. Well, that's kind of like what we were talking about in DevOps back in 2009 and 2010. It was how do we bring these disciplines together? That's like what we meant, but it became something else, right? So when we think about cloud engineering, what we have is we have this model of build and deploy and manage, right? So we build things with cloud resources, and especially if we're thinking in a serverless world. So this is not just about like building infrastructure as code or deploying containers or building VMs. We're constructing things based upon resources in our cloud providers, whether they're serverless functions that we're sending out there into the world. We're utilizing data stores and all sorts of wonderful things that our cloud providers give us. So we're building things, and those are creating our infrastructure platform upon which we can deploy our applications, whether they're functions, whether they're code running in a container or whatever. We have to get those deployed, and those become, again, that lets us deploy our applications to the cloud, which we have to continue to manage because they keep running, right? It's not just enough to get it out there in front of somebody. We have to keep it going day 1, day 2, day 3. So build, this might sound like this is just about, writing code, getting your code out there, but the build is about creating the services and infrastructure that provide what our customers need, right? So like I said, we use these cloud resources to build these applications and services, and then even the infrastructure. And maybe this is a shared service platform if you've got a large organization so that all your teams are the same. But even if you're kind of a one-person shop doing your own jam, you still are building based on these resources. And we want to create reusable infrastructure components so that the application and service delivery focus on our differentiators rather than reinventing the wheel. So reusability, like what makes your value of your team or organization or company special? And the other thing is like, besides expressing our own best practices, good practices, and common configs within our teams and orgs, when we build our infrastructure using standard programming languages, we take advantage of the entire ecosystem surrounding them. We can leverage existing IDEs, test frameworks, and approaches. So something like infrastructure as software, like Pulumi does, I can write my infrastructure code in TypeScript or Go or Python, which means I can leverage all the things those things have, right? So using these modern architectures focuses on the value these services provide rather than a specific bespoke implementation that's tied around that particular cloud or resource, right? So when we think about build, right, it's, are we talking about, are these shared services platforms? We're using reusable components, just like we do in our regular code. We want reusable infrastructure components, and we want to apply existing frameworks and tools. So a little bit, I was like, well, how do I map these ideas of sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. How do we map these ideas of build into the columns model? I'm not going to go super deep into this. I'll give you a link to the slides at the end. But the culture part is that we're focusing on differentiators, creating a common experience. This drives empathy. From the automation standpoint of build, again, reusable components, we're leveraging the ecosystems that exist, and we're avoiding these bespoke implementations because we can automate. So automation is tied into, that's the automation part. How do we talk about, value stream from the build? We're focused on value. So this is how it connects to lean. When we're thinking about the build ideas of cloud engineering, it's focused on the value and the differentiator, which can help with our efficiency, which means we're reducing waste. And this lets us review throughout our process of building to see where there's areas that we can improve. And then the measurement, this consistency breeds visibility. And that's gonna come up a lot. You'll see over and over again these principles in cloud engineering give us consistency. And then when we have that consistency, it gives us visibility because we know what we're looking at. And then the sharing, again, talked about the reusable components as a sharing thing, but that larger ecosystem that we're building within promotes sharing with that community and learning from that community and lets us learn from existing practices. So the deploy pillar, right? It doesn't count until it's in production. It doesn't do any good when it's just sitting in a repo. So code and infrastructure don't give any value until it's in front of our customers and users. But we want to do that in a really efficient and quality consistent way. If we have deployment, if we have ways that we deploy that take too long or they require too many manual steps, that blocks us not only from getting new features in front of our customers to get feedback on the value they're providing, also restoring service if we have outages and downtime when we're resolving service issues. So when we apply these software engineering practices to our deployment, that means we ship the same way every time. And it's common practice to apply these principles of continuous integration and continuous delivery to our app software, but we can use those same principles with our infrastructure, which means that new and changed infrastructure resources meet our quality controls, they're tracked and understood, and it helps us avoid issues when we're investigating that, okay, what changed problem. And there's a few more pieces about that, right? When we think about that, we're doing things the same way every time. I mean, every time. There's not an exception. That's the beauty of deployment automation. It gives us quality and security checks. Security is just another aspect of quality. So we're checking security at the same time we're checking quality. And checklists. Checklists are great, but let's automate them, right? The checklist is what would a human do? Like the human thinks about that, but if we can ensure we're doing the checklist the same way every time. And this also makes us think our infrastructure is part of our application. The Cosmos DB that I need to get going for my serverless function, like that's all part of it. It's not a sidecar thing. It's not an additional thing to do. And when you think about the columns, again, the same idea. How does deploy connect into this? So again, from a culture perspective, deployment is key. It doesn't count until it's in prod. And this gives us this idea of iterative development rather than stepwise, which gives us the continuous improvement, having a really good deploy culture around that. And then the automation parts, it's very common to think about this. It's your continuous delivery pipelines, right? So automation and deployment go very, very easily hand in hand. But again, automated checks. If you care enough about a problem, you care enough to write a test for it. And like I said, checklists are great. I'm all for checklists, but let's automate those checklists. And then from a deployment, when we're thinking about lean principles, our deployment models enable fast feedback, right? Which gives us visibility into that supply chain, which again, it might sound crazy to talk about supply chain if you're like, hey, I'm just like a one-person a software shop that's just sort of writing some code. You actually do have a supply chain. It's just really short and it's only you. And you want to see all the things that you're doing and be able to identify bottlenecks. Bottlenecks are not necessarily just between people. That can happen you as an individual in the steps you do. Where do you get blocked? Again, measuring our cycle time, just how quickly are we able to get an idea in front of a place where we can get feedback. But it's not just about speed. We're not just measuring speed. And then, again, when we're following these deploy principles, we have so much more visibility into how things are happening. If we have a common way of doing things within our team, within our org, we aren't duplicating effort. And this way, anybody, whether the person who made the change or not is involved, can know what actually changed. So we say getting our services into production is a key step, but that's not the end. Our customers are constantly using our services and applications, and we have to manage all of the resources. And you may be familiar with the adage that security is everyone's job. What that means in the world of cloud engineering is that we consider security and compliance, whether it's regulatory, like uppercase C compliance, or just your own team and org's policies, are integrated into our work. So if we treat our policy as code, just like we treat our infrastructure as code, that's a really powerful idea. So when we express these policies as code rather than prose in a document, we can apply these checks before and after we deploy our services and our infrastructure. And this gives us a common vocabulary across all of our teams. And the other thing is we want controls in place that allow who can make changes and what they can change. But that's not to get in the way of people. It's to give them the ability to feel safe to make the changes that they have to make. And so it's actually, sometimes I know it feels like policies get in our way, but if they're done properly, they're actually enabling. And so when we think about manage, I said it brings us visibility. Security is everyone's job. It gives a comment. I already talked about this. So a couple things. From the manage, the collaboration is enabled through that common code. These guardrails enable our confidence, which gives an increased common understanding across disciplines. And we talk about empathy so much when we talk about DevOps, and it's so key because if you understand what different functions do in your organization or in your team, it's so much easier to work together. And this is the thing I always like to think about from the policy perspective. Computers can't lie, right? We've probably all experienced audit theater and such, so we can have trust of the process and checks. And our policy goes from vague to understandable. Just like I said, words are hard, so let's make them code. And we can determine where we have safety improvements to be able to make, and our value stream changes are expressed in code. And it gives us visibility into current policy. If you want to know what the policy is, you don't have to go read a document. You can see the checks. and it gives us a current state of compliance, either with uppercase C or lowercase c. And this helps us identify when policy and value collide, because sometimes that happens. And again, I talked about the shared vocabulary. We can utilize existing patterns of success, and we share our learning. So this is me here right now saying, I want to take DevOps back. DevOps is not just about Kubernetes. It's not just about automation. It's not just about pipelines. It's about all those other things. So let's use cloud engineering to be not only amazingly successful, but maybe make DevOps what it has always been all along. My name is Matty Stratton. You can find me at Twitter at Matt Stratton. My slides are up at speaking.mattstratton.com. I'll have these slides up there for you as well. If you like silly things on the internet, tune in to either DevOps Party Games or CNCF Face Off, which are 2 online game shows that I host. And I hope that you have a phenomenal serverless days.